The live broadcast of the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission for December 14th will now begin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this live broadcast of our virtual meeting of the December 14th, 2021 regular meeting of the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission. This meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 due to the declared local health pandemic. For the record, my name is Madeline Sundberg and I serve as chair of the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Commissioner Bjornberg.
Present.
Commissioner Booty.
Present.
Commissioner Howard.
Present.
Commissioner Johnson.
Present.
Commissioner Nystrom.
Present.
Commissioner Sandbolt.
Present.
Commissioner Stady. Commissioner Struthers.
Present.
Commissioner Sundberg.
Present.
Commissioner Van Der Eyck.
Here.
That's 9 members present. Thank you.
Thank you. Let the record reflect we do have a quorum. With that, we will proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Our first order of business is to adopt the agenda for this meeting. We will work from the agendas that are available online. I will go through the agenda and sort out what items will be continued to a future meeting, what items will be discussed, what items will be put on the consent agenda to be approved as recommended by staff and without further discussion. So item number 4, which is 4501 Hiawatha Avenue, Ward 12. This is the designation for a historic landmark status. That item will be discussed. Item number 5, which is 524 Hennepin Avenue, Ward 3. This is a certificate of appropriateness. Has been recommended for consent unless someone wishes to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendations. So I'd like to check commissioners. Is there anybody who wishes to pull item 5 from the consent agenda? I would also like to check with the public to see if anyone has called in specifically about item number 5, which again is 524 Hennepin Avenue, Ward 3, certificate of appropriateness. If somebody wishes to speak in opposition to or modify that item, if you could please press *6 and let me know. Don't see it at the moment. Item number 6, which is 2111 52nd Street West, Ward 13. This is a demolition of historic resource. This item will be discussed. And item number 7, which is 3800 and 3360 First Street North, 2 and 51 36th Ave North, 51 34th Ave North, and 3639, 3648, 3700, and 3701 Washington Avenue North, Ward 4, adjacent to Ward 1, also known as the Upper Harbor Terminal Project, demolition of historic resources will be discussed. So again, the proposed agenda, the consent agenda will include item number 5, which is 524 Hennepin Avenue. Again, is there any opposition to staff recommendations for this item or any member of the public who wishes to speak in opposition to this item, 524 Hennepin Avenue? If you could please let me know at this time. Don't see any. We will approve the consent agenda items in one motion at the start of the meeting. And then item 4, which is 4501 Hiawatha Avenue. Item number 6, which is 2111 52nd Street West. And item 7, which is the Upper Harbor Terminal, will all have staff presentation, public comment, commission discussion, and action. Commissioners, may I have a motion to approve the proposed agenda?
Johnson so moves.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Is there a second?
Sandbolt.
Thank you, Commissioner Nystrom. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call a roll on the motion.
Commissioner Bjornberg,
Aye.
Commissioner Booty,
Aye.
Howard,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
Aye.
Commissioner Nystrom,
Aye.
Commissioner Sandbolt,
Aye.
Commissioner Stady, Commissioner Struthers,
Aye.
Commissioner Vandereyck,
Aye.
Chair Sundberg.
Aye.
That's 9 yeas and 0 nays.
Thank you. The agenda is approved. Our next order of business will be to approve the minutes from our November 30th, 2021 meeting. May I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Bjornberg so moves.
Thank you, Commissioner Bjornberg. Is there a second?
Johnson seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call a roll on the motion.
Commissioner Bjornberg,
Aye.
Commissioner Booty,
Abstain.
Commissioner Howard,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
Aye.
Commissioner Nystrom,
Aye.
Commissioner Sandbolt,
Aye.
Commissioner Stady,
Abstain. Abstain.
Commissioner Struthers. Oh, excuse me.
Aye.
Oh, Commissioner Struthers, I have you as aye. Thank you. Commissioner Vandereyck
Aye.
and Chair Sundberg.
Aye.
So that's 8 yeas and 2 abstentions.
Thank you. The minutes are approved, and let the record reflect that Commissioner Stady has arrived. Before I open the hearing to public comments, let me summarize the process for conducting the public hearing in this virtual format. The process for the public hearing is as follows. First, we'll act on the consent agenda that we just set. Once the consent agenda,
you have called is not available. Please leave a message after the tone.
I'm not sure what that was. Once the consent agenda is approved, the commission is done with those items. The applicants may contact planning staff tomorrow about next steps. After the consent agenda items are approved, we will take each remaining agenda item in order. First, the planning staff will present its report and commissioners may ask questions of staff. Then we will hear from the applicant and commissioners may ask questions of the applicant. After that, I'll open the public hearing and invite public comment. We'll take speakers in the order they pre-registered, if there are any. Speakers will be limited to 2 minutes. We ask that after your name is called, you state your name and address for the record and then proceed to your comments. Once we've completed the list of pre-registered speakers, I'll check to see if there are any other speakers in the queue who may have called in. In order to activate your microphone, you'll need to press *6 on your phone and wait to hear the pre-recorded message before we can hear you. So again, I'll take the pre-registered speakers in order and then open the floor to any other speakers. Just remember to state your name and address, and please keep your comments to the specific application that is before us today. After the public comments are complete, I will close the hearing on that item. Commissioners will deliberate and then act on the application before us. So I will open the public hearing on the consent agenda items, which again, this is 524 Hennepin Avenue, Ward 3. So again, is there any opposition to staff recommendations for this item? You can press *6 and let me know if you've called in about item number 5. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing on the consent agenda items. May I have a motion to approve staff findings and recommendations for these items?
Howard so moves.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Is there a second?
Sandbolt, second.
Thank you, Commissioner Sandbolt. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call a roll on the motion.
Commissioner Bjornberg,
Aye.
Commissioner Booty,
Aye.
Commissioner Howard,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
Aye.
Commissioner Nystrom,
Aye.
Commissioner Sandbolt,
Aye.
Commissioner Stady,
Aye.
Commissioner Struthers,
Aye.
or Van der Eyck.
Goodbye.
Aye. That wasn't me.
Thank you, Commissioner Van der Eyck, and Chair Sundberg.
Aye.
That's 10 yeas and 0 nays.
Thank you. That motion passes. And item 5, which is 524 Hennepin Avenue, Ward 3, is approved as recommended by staff on the agenda. Applicants for those items may contact planning staff tomorrow about next steps. Our next item is item 4, which is 4501 Hiawatha Avenue, Ward 12. This is a designation for historic landmark status. The staff report will be presented by Rob Skolecki.
Thank you, Chair Sundberg. And good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Rob Skolecki, City Planner in the Historic Preservation section of CPED. Today I'm presenting the designation of Fire Station number 24 as an individual landmark. The property is located at 4501 Hiawatha Avenue. Next slide, please. In January of 2021, Andrew Johnson, City of Minneapolis Council Member for Ward 12, submitted a nomination application for 4501 Hiawatha Avenue for consideration as a local historic landmark. The nomination application was supported by Minneapolis City Vice Council President Andrea Jenkins of Ward 8. As you may remember, the HPC heard the application at its meeting of February 16th of 2021 and unanimously voted to approve the nomination of Fire Station number 24 located at 4501 Hiawatha Avenue. Interim protection was established and the HPC directed the planning director to prepare or cause to be prepared a designation study. The City of Minneapolis received legacy grant funding to hire a consultant to draft the designation study. Following a request for proposals, CPED selected the 106 group as the historical consultants to complete the designation study. During the drafting of the study, the consultants and staff held 2 virtual community meetings to discuss the designation process and preliminary findings for the Fire Station number 24 research. A final draft of the designation study was submitted by staff in September, by the consultants to staff in September 2021 and subsequently sent to the Minnesota State Historic Preservation Office and Minneapolis City Planning Commission to begin their respective review periods. Both SHPO and the Planning Commission concurred with the designation findings. As you may have noticed, SHPO's letters included in the attachments and Planning Commission's comments were included in a memo sent to commissioners today. Next slide, please. Staff is recommending that the Fire Station number 24 building be designated as a local historic landmark. Staff finds that the property exhibits sufficient historic integrity and relevant significance to be considered for local landmark designation under criterion 1 and 2. The designation study states that the subject property was constructed in 1907 to serve as Fire Station number 24. It was staffed exclusively by Black firefighters between 1907 to 1912. Fire Chief Canterbury's decision to staff the station in this way was an attempt to evade existing civil rights laws and effectively segregate the Minneapolis Fire Department. Doing this led to a discriminatory work environment that characterized the department for decades to come, discouraged Black employment, and resulted in an entirely white workforce by the late 1940s. The designation study further details that the fire department's practice of racial discrimination that began with the staffing of Fire Station 24 became a significant focus of the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s. Thus, Fire Station number 24 is significant under Criterion 1 due to its association with the practices of segregation and discrimination within the Minneapolis Fire Department and the limited opportunities for Black employment. Next slide, please. Under Criterion 2 for the association to the lives of significant persons or groups, as the only fire station in Minneapolis known to have exclusively employed Black firefighters at one time, Fire Station 24 is significant for its association with the African American community at large, as well as several individuals. The property is significant under Criterion 2 due to its association with John W. Cheatham, Frank S. Harris, and James Rad Cannon, with the study pointing out that there are other known Black firefighters from Fire Station 24, which include Archie Van Spence and Oscar Clark, but more research would be needed to determine if the property would be worthy of significance under Criterion 2 for their association. Next slide, please. The following policies of Minneapolis 2040 would apply to the designation of Fire Station number 24. For policy 60 of intrinsic value of properties, Fire Station 24 is a significant property that is important to the city's heritage. Landmark designation would protect the building for years to come. Designation would allow the increased awareness, understanding, and the appreciation of intrinsic and potential economic value of this important piece of the city's cultural and social history. Under Policy 92 for identifying and evaluating historic resources, sites of African American history have been traditionally underrepresented in the body of the city's landmark properties. So designation of the property will aid in illuminating and interpreting a significant piece of African American history in Minneapolis. The designation of Fire Station number 24 will help ensure that the history of segregation and discrimination in the city and the service and experience of Minneapolis's earliest Black firefighters will be brought forward and known by Minneapolis residents for decades to come. And under Policy 93 for stewarding historic properties, historic preservation regulations that come with historic designation would, of course, encourage the retention of this important community resource. So local landmark designation ensures the protection of this significant piece of the city's history through the consideration of changes to the property through review processes while understanding the significance of the property's social and cultural history. With that, the Department of Community Planning and Economic Development recommends that the Heritage Preservation Commission and City Council adopt staff findings for the local designation of Fire Station number 24 located at 4501 Hiawatha Avenue, and recommend the motion that the Heritage Preservation Commission and City Council approve the local designation of Fire Station number 24 located at 4501 Hiawatha Avenue. And with that, I'm available for any questions, but I do understand that a member of the consulting team who drafted the studies here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Are there any questions for staff? I don't see any at this time. I will now open the public hearing for this item, and it looks like, I'm guessing this person, it sounds like somebody from the applicant team is here, and I'm not sure if that's the person who is signed up on my list or not. So if the consultant would like to speak, if you could press *6 and introduce yourself.
Hi, yeah, this is Steve Gallo from the 106 Group. I don't have anything to add other than what Rob said. I'm mainly here to listen to the proceedings and answer any questions if they come up.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for the consultant? Don't see any at the moment. Thank you for coming.
Thanks.
It looks like I don't have anybody else signed up here for item number 4, but I would like to check if there is anyone else in the queue who wished to speak on item 4501 Hiawatha Avenue, Ward 12. doesn't sound like there's anyone else here to speak on it. Okay, seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Commissioners, let's discuss this item. I was excited to see this come forward again as an inhabitant of this ward. I guess I feel like it's a really important and often overlooked portion of our history, and that this brings some really underrepresented aspects of the city of Minneapolis's history to light. So I am excited to see this move forward with the landmark designation, but I am hoping to hear some thoughts from other commissioners. Commissioner Johnson.
Yep, I'll just echo what you said. I was involved in the first time that this property came before us, and it was exciting to talk about and vote on. So I'm excited that this more BIPOC landmarks are being nominated, and we're seeing the city and the residents are seeing the historical significance of these buildings in the community. So really glad to see this move forward. And if the other commissioners don't have anything to add, I can make a motion. So I'll give them a second to see if anybody else wants to speak.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Commissioner Sandbolt.
I don't have any real new thoughts. I guess I second everything that everybody has said, and I'm excited to see this as part of the historic designations, and I think it is an attribute to our staff and to everybody for trying to diversify the history that we're preserving. So I'm glad to see this coming through, and I'm also glad to see this particular building being designated, and I hope that going forward that it has to go through our process will help retain this building, and also help bring back some of the character that I think is right now being a little overshadowed by those giant billboards. So hopefully this kind of helps give some reasoning behind some of the future developments that happen to the building. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Sandbolt. I was excited to see in the application that they're already working on our certificate of no change and working their way through this process, because I think that's always a good sign of active participation. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Johnson.
If nobody else wants to speak, I will make a motion to approve the local designation of Firehouse Station 24, located at 4501 Hiawatha Avenue.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Nystrom seconds.
Oh, everyone wants to second. Thank you, Commissioner Nystrom. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing no further discussion, would the clerk call the roll on the motion?
Commissioner Bjornberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Booty.
Aye.
Howard.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Nystrom.
Aye.
Sandbolt.
Aye.
Commissioner Stady. Aye. I think that was an aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Struthers.
Aye.
Commissioner Vandereyck.
Aye.
Chair Sundberg.
Aye.
That's 10 yeas and 0 nays. Thank you.
Thank you. That motion passes. Our next item is item 6, which is 2111 52nd Street West, Ward 13. This is a demolition of a historic resource. The staff report will be presented by Rob Skolecki.
Thanks again, Chair Sundberg. Again, my name is Rob Skolecki, City Planner in the Historic Preservation section of CPED. This application is a demolition of historic resource application for 2111 52nd Street West, known as the William Gray Door House. Next slide, please. The subject property was identified as early as 1982 for its architectural significance as part of the city of Minneapolis's 800 list of sites recommended for designation. The property was surveyed for the Southwest Minneapolis Historic Resources Inventory in 2005 by Mead and Hunt, and was recommended eligible for local designation and National Register listing at that time. The property was also identified eligible for designation in the 2013 Historic Resources Inventory capstone by Stark Preservation Planning. A historic review letter for the property was completed by CPED staff in June of 2021, which concluded that the property appeared to meet local designation criteria for landmark consideration, and the site was deemed a potential historic resource. Next slide, please. 2111 52nd Street West includes a 1 1/2 story plaster, veneer, and brick dwelling with a concrete foundation, which was built for owner William Gray Door by builders W.O. Clark and Son in 1917. The subject building was designed in an eclectic manner, employing elements of the American Craftsman movement with substantial influence from European cottage or country house revival styles. William Gray Door was a prominent architect who practiced with Door and Door, a partnership formed with his father, Adam Lansing Door, around 1911. The subject building was completed for William Door in 1917, and he lived at this location until at least 1950. At least that's what's according to Minneapolis City directories. Permit and historic newspaper articles for the dwelling suggest that Door was the architect, and because the dwelling was built for him and no other architect is credited, it appears almost certain that Door was responsible for the design. However, this could not be confirmed by preservation staff with currently available evidence. Next slide, please. The building appears common of Door's designs using various revival styles. A comparable English-inspired or Tudor revival dwelling at 2409 22nd Street West nearby was completed by Door and Door in 1929, and it consists of similar design motifs shown in the subject property. During the time Door lived at the subject building, it appears that he had a significant architectural career. At least 4 single-family dwellings designed by Door and Door are already designated by the city as contributing resources in the Lyndhurst Residential Historic District. Door and Door also designed the Alpha Tau Omega fraternity building in the University of Minnesota Greek Letter Chapter House Historic District, which is a contributing resource that was built in 1924. However, the full body of William G. Door and Door's work in Minneapolis has not yet been studied. Next slide, please. The multi-story garage addition on the west, which is the side elevation that can be seen here on the photo to the right, was completed in 1993. It significantly increased the massing and character of the building. The subject parcel was also historically larger than it is present day. Historic photographs, which you just saw in past slides that were submitted by the applicant, confirm that the dwelling previously retained a more apparent association to the surrounding landscape, including Minnehaha Creek. And this association has been considerably impacted with later construction of neighboring dwellings. And the applicant is proposing to demolish the subject dwelling, and the applicants did not submit any potential future plans for the site with their application. Next slide, please. Under the demolition of historic resource application analysis for significance, in CPED's review, the subject property does not appear eligible for local designation, and I'll highlight a few of the more relevant criteria and evaluations. In the historic review letter, CPED previously determined that the property may be eligible for local designation under criterion 2 for the property's association to William Gray Door, since the building was his home during much of his prolific architectural career with Door and Door. However, with additional research, the dwelling does not appear to retain sufficient integrity to be considered for landmark status under this criterion. since historic photo evidence has been presented to confirm that the smaller massing of the dwelling has been significantly affected due to the 1.5-story postmodern garage addition, again seen here in the survey photograph actually from 2005. The property no longer appears to be an intact representation of William Gray Dorr's dwelling, since the addition was completed in an incompatible manner, affecting the scale of the building. CPED staff no longer believes that the property retains sufficient integrity to be considered for landmark designation under Criterion 2. Under Criterion 4, the subject property is a notable eclectic example of European revival influences in American architecture in the first half of the 20th century. The original design for the property appears to have mixed popular craftsmen and bungalow forms of the time with English and French country house or cottage motifs to create a noteworthy design. However, as mentioned, the 1.5-story double bay garage addition, built nearly 80 years following the building's original construction, removed the full west elevation. The addition was completed in an incompatible and highly noticeable way that does not meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation for additions. Therefore, the property does not appear to retain integrity or significance in design to be considered for landmark designation under Criterion 4. And the last one I want to highlight is Criterion 6. It's Association of Master Architects. As I mentioned before, staff has not been able to confirm that Dorr was the architect who designed the home, since an architect is omitted from the original building permit and records of the home's construction. Staff finds that there's not enough evidence to confirm that the dwelling would exemplify William Gray Dorr's work to meet designation Criterion 6, and other properties designed by Dorr are either already designated by the city or known by staff to be more intact and emblematic examples of Dorr's work. Thus, staff finds the property not eligible for designation under Criterion 6 due to a notable loss of historic integrity and inadequate evidence to suggest the current form of the dwelling exemplifies Dorr's work. Next slide, please. And for integrity, as I've mentioned a few times here, staff believes the subject property does not retain the integrity required to be considered for landmark designation. The garage addition is incompatible in placement and scale to an extent that negatively affects the building, the integrity of the building's original design. This also affects the material integrity of the building. The property's integrity of setting has been more recently affected. A large contemporary dwelling was constructed to the east of the dwelling at 2107 52nd Street West in 2013. This part historically included open land, which you can see here on the photo on the right, and there's an auxiliary structure in that location as well. The subject property previously had a more apparent relationship to Minnehaha Creek and greater access to park space. However, the neighborhood generally retains integrity of setting, but as mentioned before, this also affects the feeling and affects the integrity of feeling of the property. For evaluation of unsafe or dangerous conditions, reasonable alternatives to demolition, and economic value or usefulness of the existing structure, in CPED's review, the property does not appear eligible for landmark designation. The applicants have not proven that the dwelling is in an unsafe or dangerous condition to an extent that would allow for demolition. Evidence was not submitted to show that feasible alternatives to demolition were thoroughly explored. And the submitted evidence does not show that the building is economically infeasible to maintain in its current state, or that necessary and desired repairs could not be reasonably completed at the property. With this considered, the Department of Community Planning and Economic Development recommends that the Heritage Preservation Commission adopt staff findings for the application and the property located at 2111 52nd Street West, and recommend the Heritage Preservation Commission approves the demolition of historic resource application. And with that, again, I am available for any questions, but I do see that the property owners and applicants are signed up to speak as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Are there any questions for staff? I don't see any at this time. With that, I will open the public hearing for this item. It appears that both of the owners are signed up. I'm not sure which order you would like to go in, but Maggie and Steve, if you could press *6, wait to hear the pre-recorded message to activate your microphone, and then state your name and address for the record.
Hello, this is Steve, Maggie. Hopefully you can hear us. It said we are unmuted.
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we just would like to state first, we'd like to thank the commission and Mr. Skolecki for taking the time and effort to review our application. We believe historic preservation is a very important part of the city of Minneapolis. However, for the reasons stated in our application, we don't believe that William Dorr or the property itself rises to the level of historic significance and doesn't deserve designation by the commission. And we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Are there any questions for the applicants? I don't see any. I would like to check if there is anyone else who wishes to speak for or against this application. If you could press *6 on your phone, wait to hear the pre-recorded message, and let me know that you are there. Okay, it doesn't seem like there's anyone else here on this item. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Commissioners, let's discuss this item. I know it's always difficult to review a demolition of a historic resource. I don't know, I think we all feel a little sad about it. I found myself agreeing with staff's feelings that the integrity here, especially I guess on the street side, which is normally how we place the greatest significance, had been somewhat diminished on this property. I guess I also felt like if this was being considered as part of a larger district, I would have different feelings about this, but because it's coming forward and would have to be an individual designation, I guess I was feeling like this this application made sense to me. I would like to recommend, though, that the applicants, the owners, consider using deconstruction as part of their demolition process. Hennepin County has somewhat little known grants that give homeowners funding to use deconstruction of homes, specifically in this type of scenario where you have a home with some beautiful historic items that could be salvaged and used in a different building. So I would really promote looking into the deconstruction grants. Olivia Cashman runs that program for Hennepin County, and I think that she would be very receptive to this project. I could see there's lots of nice masonry and other features that they would be really excited to have salvaged. So something that I would promote considering, but not a direct impact on the application before us. Commissioner Sandbolt.
Yeah, I think I'd agree on this property that while I think it is totally, based on the photos that I've seen, totally in the realm of something that could be rehabbed and saved, I'm also of the mindset and the agreement with staff that the addition really did kind of change the massing and the historic character of the building and really negatively impacted that. Also, I'm encouraged to know that we have some other better example of Dorr's work that have been designated in the Minneapolis area. So that served as a real kind of encouragement to me that this is probably not the most exemplary of his work, and that we do have examples of that style and that architect's work that have been preserved. So I would be in support of approving this. I totally agree, Chair Sundberg, with your recommendation. There's a lot of material here that would be wonderfully put to use preserving some of the other homes and buildings that are designated that might need the parts and pieces that could be found here, some of the masonry, the hardwood floors, those kinds of things. So it would be an excellent house for that program. So I hope the applicants will consider that. Those are my 2 cents. Love to hear what other commissioners have for thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner Sandbolt. I'm looking for some other commissioners to weigh in here. Commissioner Howard.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Like you said, the demolition always, gives us pause when we have to review demolition. And I am one who typically says additions will not make something not historic. An addition will never be big enough to be something that'll take away from the story of the property. This addition is a big addition. And it's very visible from the front, and it's not differentiated at all. It's not, it's compatible, but only because it's trying to mimic the original design. And I agree. It helps to know that there are other door properties in Minneapolis. I would love to see a comparison to all of those, but I don't think it's warranted for this review. I would love to see some of their other work recognized at some point, but I don't think this one is the one to do it. And it's hard to say that, but I tend to agree with staff on this one. The integrity just isn't there.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Anyone else wishing to speak or make a motion? Commissioner Sandbolt.
Since we have a quiet group, I guess I'll make a motion to approve the demolition of the historic resource at, let's see, 211 52nd Street West.
Thank you, Commissioner Sandbolt. Is there a second?
Bjornberg seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Bjornberg. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call roll on the motion.
Commissioner Bjornberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Booty.
Aye.
Commissioner Howard.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Nystrom.
Aye.
Commissioner Sandbolt.
Aye.
Commissioner Stady.
Aye.
Commissioner Struthers.
Aye.
Commissioner Van der Eyck.
Aye.
Chair Sundberg.
Aye.
That's 10 yeas and 0 nays.
Thank you. That motion passes. Our next item is item number 7, which I'm just going to say is the Upper Harbor Terminal demolition of historic resource, and the staff report will be presented by Andrea Burke.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Andrea Burke, and I am the supervisor for the Historic Preservation team in CPED. I am presenting tonight a demolition of historic resource application for the potential Upper Harbor Terminal Historic District and 3 monolithic concrete domes. Next slide, please. I'm just going to change approach. CPED, a larger CPED, owns the Upper Harbor Terminal property located on 9 parcels along the Mississippi River in North Minneapolis. Comprising 53 acres and 37 buildings and structures, the Upper Harbor Terminal was developed as an intermodal barge shipping terminal in 1968 near the head of commercial navigation on the river and remained in operation until late 2014 due to the planned closure of the Upper St. Anthony Falls Lock. The city, in conjunction with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, are preparing a redevelopment proposal of the site. There have been multiple earlier studies that have evaluated the Upper Harbor Terminal as a historic district from 2003 to 2020, and more recently for archaeological resources in 2021. The Upper Harbor Terminal is not eligible for the National Register as a historic district as confirmed by SHPO, but is a contributing resource to the larger Upper Harbor Historic District, which spans the Mississippi and includes multiple sites along it. These earlier studies informed the alternative urban area-wide review for the proposed redevelopment of the site. Called an AUAR for short. The AUAR process is a hybrid of the Environmental Assessment Worksheet, an EAW, and the Environmental Impact Statement, an EIS review processes, and is a planning tool to understand how different development scenarios will affect the environment of a community before development occurs. Over the past few years, the city and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board have conducted extensive community engagement to plan for a redevelopment of the site, which consists of a mixed-use development with riverfront parkland. The AUAR was adopted by the city in September of this year, inclusive of a mitigation plan to account for impacts to environmental resources, including historic properties. Next slide, please. In anticipation of the proposed demolition, CPED retained a historic preservation consultant, Hess Rice & Company, to write a local designation study that evaluated the Upper Harbor Terminal as a potential historic district and the 3 monolithic concrete domes as individual landmarks, as was recommended in these previous studies. Within the boundaries of the potential Upper Harbor Terminal Historic District, the local designation study resurveyed and identified 13 buildings, 17 structures, 6 sites, and 6 objects, and recommended 18 of these resources as contributing and 19 resources as non-contributing for a total of 37 resources. The 3 remaining monolithic concrete domes were also resurveyed as part of the district and as individual resources. The 4th dome collapsed in 2018, and I'll explain a little later why. We commissioned this study, or CPED did, not CPED Historic Preservation Section, because all the previous studies had all recommended this site as eligible for local designation, and in advance of an official action, wanted to present as much information before you in anticipation of this application. The Upper Harbor Terminal was directly associated with the St. Anthony Falls locks and dams and the river as a mode of transportation for commodities. North Minneapolis was chosen to build the public terminal for its expansion opportunities, drainage, and access to rail and roadways. With initial construction beginning in 1968, the Upper Harbor Terminal was the result of local lobbying to make Minneapolis the top inland harbor in America, following the opening of the Upper St. Anthony Lock and Dam in 1963. The potential Upper Harbor Terminal Historic District is recommended eligible for local designation under criteria 1, 3, 4, and potentially 7. The period of significance recommended for the district is 1968, when construction began on the Upper Harbor Terminal, to 1976, when the Upper Harbor Terminal helped Minneapolis achieve the greatest shipping tonnage through the St. Anthony Falls locks and dams. Next slide, please. Within the boundaries of the potential district, there are 3 monolithic concrete domes that fall outside the period of significance recommended. The 4 domes were constructed between 1982 and 1987 and engineered by the South brothers, who received a patent in 1979 for their design and construction method. The 3 domes are each recommended as individually eligible under criteria 3 and 4, with a recommended period of significance of 1984 and 1987, the years the respective domes were constructed. Next slide, please. The city, in partnership with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, United Properties, and First Avenue Productions, proposed to redevelop the entire 53-acre site into a mixed-use development with residential, retail and service, hospitality, office, light industrial, and outdoor performing arts center, and parkland. Demolition of 17 buildings and structures, 6 of which are contributing and 11 which are non-contributing, is initially proposed, but demolition for the entire site is sought to allow maximum redevelopment potential. Site work right now is expected to begin in 2022. Next slide, please. As part of the AUAR, a mitigation plan is proposed to offset the environmental impacts of the redevelopment, including the proposed demolitions of historic resources. The mitigation plan for historic resources includes consultation with SHPO should the project be subject to Section 106, evaluation of options for adaptive reuse, preservation, removal, redevelopment, interim stabilization measures for existing buildings and structures based on community input, using existing documentation to inform interpretive planning, explore interpretive planning to incorporate the history and culture associated with the site into physical features and site programming, using an archaeological plan to guide ground disturbance and evaluate potential impacts to any materials identified, as shown in the slide before you here. Next slide, please. CPED concurs that the potential Upper Harbor Terminal Historic District appears eligible for local designation under criteria 1, 3, 4, and potentially 7, and also concurs that the 3 monolithic concrete domes appear eligible under criteria 3 and 4. Both the district and the domes retain their integrity enough to convey their significance. According to Chapter 599 in the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances, if the Commission determines that a property is a historic resource, they shall deny the demolition permit unless the applicant meets their burden of proof with respect to an unsafe or dangerous condition, or whether there are no reasonable alternatives to demolition considering the significance, the integrity, or the economic value or usefulness of the existing structure, including its current use, cost of renovation, and feasible alternative uses. Next slide, please. The resources in the Upper Harbor Terminal and the domes exhibit deterioration, some to a structurally unsafe degree. An existing condition inspection and reuse report was completed in June of 2015 by CPED by Short, Elliott, Hendrickson Inc., SEH, and Hess Rice and Company. The report evaluated the conditions of the resources and found that 5 of the 17 buildings and structures initially proposed for demolition are in structurally poor condition. Additionally, as a nearly vacant industrial site along the river, preventing access to the public is crucial to prevent injuries, as many of the structures are not safe for the public. In staff's opinion, this is not the strongest finding for demolition, though it holds merit. Next slide, please. A stronger finding for demolition of this site is whether reasonable alternatives to demolition exist. The site has significance and integrity. However, a challenging aspect of this district and the domes is the potential for reuse. Their specialized historic use as a barge terminal is obsolete in 2021. Repair is possible, but the alternative uses for a truck scale, a rail dump, a loadout shelter, or domes meant to hold fertilizer are minimal. The cost for mothballing each of the buildings alone is substantial, as identified in the 2015 report by SEH. Should a different use be identified, the scale of modification needed would be difficult to achieve, meeting the Secretary of the Interior standards in this regard. Given the available reuse options for the specialized resources on the site, combined with the costs to mothball or alter them, there are very few reasonable alternatives to demolition. Next slide, please. The site offers a wide area of options for redevelopment, including new public infrastructure, private development, and park-related improvements. There has been an extensive community engagement process to envision and plan for redevelopment of the site, resulting in the city-approved coordinated plan for redevelopment. It is worth noting that a key outcome of the public engagement process for the Upper Harbor Terminal identified that there is no cultural or social connection between the residents of North Minneapolis and the existing structures on the site. In many cases, it was identified that there is a negative connotation between the use of the existing structures and the negative impact the previous land use and the heavy industrial activities of the site has had on residents in North Minneapolis. Next slide, please. Some of the ideas for the potential reuse included food vending and markets, picnic shelters, a brewery. Some of the resources did not have any potential reuse options identified, and some reuse proposals include the potential preservation of some of the resources as seen in this slide. Many of the reuse ideas explored above are not viable and were not desired by the community in the outreach conducted. The report by SEH looked at a do-nothing, mothball costs, upgrade costs, and engineering costs. The costs are substantial compared with the limited reuse options. And additionally, the Upper Harbor Terminal property operates with a deficit of approximately $2 million annually, as the property management of the site exceeds the revenue generated for the 53-acre property. For all these reasons, CPED agrees with the applicant, CPED, that there are no reasonable alternatives to demolition considering the site's economic value and usefulness of the existing structures, given their current use, renovation costs, and feasible reuse options. I also want to clarify that CPED in my regard in the historic preservation section is different from the applicant, which is CPED on the economic development side. Therefore, CPED recommends that the Heritage Preservation Commission adopt staff findings for the demolition of historic resource application by CPED and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board for the properties located within the boundaries of the potential Upper Harbor Terminal Historic District and the 3 monolithic concrete domes, and approve the demolition subject to the following conditions. The mitigation plan developed as part of the AUAR for historic properties shall be carried out to offset the adverse impacts resulting from the demolition of historic resources. That concludes my long presentation. I am available for questions. The applicant has also prepared a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I was curious, I guess I have a question, if staff discussed any additional mitigation options beyond what was shown in the AUAR?
I can answer that, Madam Chair. We didn't. I was aware and kind of participated when the AUR was going through, and I felt like the mitigation plan that was developed for the AUAR was fairly robust. We did provide comment on some of the mitigation options. You know, some of the points that I stressed as part of it was, you know, a preservation positive type outcome, something that doesn't necessarily sit on a shelf, but that also, you know, has an opportunity to provide a learning experience and to continue interpretive options for this. So there was actually quite a large, there were a number of options considered for the mitigation plan in this respect.
Okay, thank you. It looks like Commissioner Struthers also has a question for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question I have relates, there are actually a few questions depending on the answers, but relates to the report itself, which on page 9 says, at this time, until a redevelopment proposal is finalized, 17 buildings and structures are proposed for demolition. However, demolition approval for all buildings, sites, structures, and objects being sought by CPED and the MPRB to allow maximum flexibility with the site. But then, I'm sorry, I forgot my camera. You can hear me, I hope. Now maybe you can see me too. Okay. But on page 11, it says, in citing the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances, Title 23, Chapter 599, the destruction is either necessary to correct an unsafe or dangerous condition on the property, or no reasonable alternatives to the destruction. And I'm confused about what I see on page 9, what I see on page 11. And then on page 15, it says, given the available reuse options for the specialized resources on the site, combined with the cost to mothball or alter them, there are, quote, very few alternatives to demolition. Again, no statement about no alternatives or about the unsafe situation. And then the findings on page 17 now contradict that and say there are no reasonable alternatives to destruction and demolition initially proposed for the remaining 20 resources. And so, I think there are some that are contributing, some are not, and I'm just really confused.
Thank you, Commissioner Struthers, and I appreciate your thorough analysis of the staff report. No, that's wonderful. I can help explain that. Part of that is, so to explain the difference in the demolition between the 17 and then seeking demolition for everything. From my understanding, and I'll let the applicants speak with their presentation, is that a redevelopment proposal hasn't been finalized, but they're still in the planning stages of it. But there is an initial phase right now that is being sought after to start some of this redevelopment. And in order to do that, that is where these 17 resources are coming from in order to start some of the construction for this larger redevelopment proposal, which is still a moving target. But I think in the applicant's desire was to not have to come back to the HPC every single time a demolition is sought, because in reality, we're looking at the entire site all at once. So that's why there's kind of a distinction between, as part of this initial phase of development, they're looking at these 17, and that's where those are listed out. But in reality, with this demo of historic resources, we're also looking at the entire Upper Harbor Terminal potential historic district with the 3 concrete domes. And they are seeking demolition for everything, so that there's flexibility, and that whatever you decide today, we aren't coming back and forth all the time and coming in that decision. To your comments about the staff report, I wanted to lay out the arguments, because the way the Chapter 599 reads is says that when you do have a historic resource, and that's where we're coming out and saying, we have all of this literature out there that says this is a historic resource as a district. It meets the criteria. It has integrity, and the only way to make the findings in order to approve the demolition of a historic resource for the commission is, it's got to meet their burden of proof, which is 1, either it's an unsafe or dangerous condition. In my analysis of the applicant's application, there is some findings for some of the buildings, but I guess I felt for the initial 17 that showed which ones were structurally unsafe versus the others that weren't, 6 to 11. I didn't feel it was the strongest finding to meet that burden of proof, but that the stronger finding in staff's opinion was really under the reasonable alternatives to demolition. And my wording, I can see your point. I was making the case in that there's so much literature on this, and there's been so many evaluations and studies and engagement, reuse studies in 2015 that looked into what could be done with this site, and what was put forth by the applicant in staff's opinion showed that there were really no reasonable alternatives to demolition. And I clarified that in the findings, but I think to your credit, yes, it could have maybe been made a little more clear in that one sentence that you referenced. but the way as I was putting together was that it was leading up to this is everything that had been looked at. And at the end of the day, given the specialized nature of this site, there weren't any reasonable alternatives to demolition, given the, costs for repair and renovation, alternative uses, reuse options, and so on and so forth. I hope that helps.
Commissioner Struthers, did you have a follow-up question, it looked like?
I mean, when I go back and look at what's on page 9, at this time, demolition for all building site structures is being sought by CPED and the MPRB to allow maximum flexibility with the site. And I guess I'm wondering, it's kind of an awkward situation where the CPED is an owner and the park board. Would we agree to this for any other applicant? That's my question. As a relatively new commissioner, I don't know what's come before you before, but my question is, in this sort of potential conflict of interest situation, is this something we would have agreed to for anybody else?
That's a good question and a good comment. It is unusual, and this is a complicated and unusual project that has been going on for many years. And yes, I did note that in our entity, I am CPED, although I'm in the historic preservation section, but it's ultimately CPED that owns the property. There are not many properties in the city where this is the situation. And I think to be as objective as possible, that's why CPED and Economic Development did hire a third-party consultant to conduct a designation study ahead of an official action to try and keep it as objective as possible. So it wasn't me myself reviewing this information and making that. It was, the evaluation of the significance integrity. It was the consultant. Now, when it comes to evaluating the findings, is it a little unusual that CPED is asking CPED for this, but in a way not. CPED's asking the Heritage Preservation Commission for approval to demolish a historic resource. This is something I know our attorneys have been very well aware of. This has happened before. I can't give you the exact instance of it, but I guess to let you know that, our section did try to remain as removed from this evaluation process and treat, the other internal section of CPED as separately as possible, so that we were reviewing it as we were any other application. But in my analysis, I did feel like the burden of proof had been met in this particular case, and that all of the studies and the information out there was as transparent as possible.
Thank you.
It looks like Commissioner Van Eyck has a question as well.
Yeah, hey, I'm thinking of another situation where this would have happened. I think some of the commissioners on the commission may have been on at the time. I wasn't, but PB Plaza would have been a situation where CPED was applying to CPED for some changes to a historic resource. So that's a situation where this has happened before. So it's not completely outside the realm of possibility. CPED is also a landowner at times. So one of the things that I guess I'd like clarification on, and this may be an applicant question, maybe more than staff question, but I'm gonna throw it out there to staff first. I don't know where this large redevelopment project stands as far as who's been awarded individual pieces of it. But by what I'm looking at for this particular area, it looks like the park board will own this piece of land eventually, which is a separate entity from the city of Minneapolis. So I'm wondering if there's a chance, you outlined there in your staff report presentation, Andrea, that Section 106 is a part of this. I'm wondering if that process has taken place if the consultant was looking at it from a Section 106 perspective, which is different than a historic resource survey, because Section 106 also looks at impact of the surrounding area as well. And if there's a potential for that, and what thoughts there are, maybe even from, just because I have this actually literally coming up on a project just down the river from this site's location on a project of mine that I'm working on, if there's been discussion of archaeological resources, things like that, that go beyond just the extant resources that we're talking about. That's not necessarily important for the discussion today, but I am just interested to hear about other public policy bodies that have oversight on this and where they're at in any review process. So Andrea, to the extent that you have information on that, or perhaps the applicant can provide some color on that as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Vander Eyck. I can answer part of that, and then the other part I will direct to the applicant when it's their turn to present. Section 106 has been volleyed around for this many times. As part of the AUAR process, we have been consulting with the State Historic Preservation Office, and that's where a lot of this discussion about the larger Upper Harbor District, the one along the Mississippi River with the multiple sites and how the Upper Harbor fits into it, that's where a lot of these studies were generated, the one from 2020 in particular. As for Section 106, to date, there has been no triggering event. There's been no federal permit license or money pulled for this particular project. There have been some back and forth over whether or not some of the work along the river will trigger Section 106. To date, that has not happened. I can let the applicant speak a little bit more to that, but that is something that has been looked into, and at this point, there has been no Section 106 triggering event picked up. The State Historic Preservation Office is aware of that as well. And then your second part, I'm going to try and remember what the second part was. Archaeology, thank you.
Archaeology, which I think probably would come from Section 106 more than anything else, unless you have talked about archaeological potential.
I'm glad actually you mentioned it because I would like to touch on it a bit, because it has been touched on for this as part of the AUAR. As part of that, there was an archaeological consultant that went out. They started off with a phase 1A, which is essentially a literature sort of the site. That picked up a few hits. Obviously, it's along the river. That's usually a very hotbed for potential archaeological resources. With that, a phase 1 was conducted. So shovel test pits were done up and along the area of the 9 parcels. 2 of the parcels had positive shovel test pits. And with that, the archaeological consultant recommended a phase 2 and moving forward with that. That is all very recent, as in less than 30 days ago. And so I think the applicant is still deciding where to go with that, but the applicant has been very forthcoming with wanting to put forth and evaluate all options. And I included the archaeological phase 1 report in the attachments of the staff report to show you what was discovered there, and it's largely some foundations. So it's possible we may have some resources there, possibly some eligible resources that's discovered as part of a phase 2 in archaeology, but that's why I also included as potentially eligible under criterion 7, because at the time the designation study was written, the phase 1 was not complete that had those results from that. So it actually does all roll in together, and this project is so complicated in that we have these local reviews, we have state reviews, and then may or may not have federal reviews coming into it.
Thank you, Andrea. Commissioner Howard has a question for staff.
Lots of questions for staff tonight. So my question is related to the partially to the 106 review, but also the mitigation plan. And it ties into this notion that, PP Plaza came up. And the commission was part of that consultation process on PD Plaza. It doesn't appear to have any role for the commission in the consultation as part of the mitigation plan. And frankly, I think the mitigation plan is very loosey-goosey. There's a lot of coulds in there. And if there is no Section 106 hook, I'm curious as to how we ensure that there is an interpretive plan effort and that there is interpretation out here, because the way it's written, it's explore interpretive planning. The interpretive work could incorporate the history, use documentation of historic resources to inform interpretive planning, but there's no definitive, there will be interpretive planning and an interpretive plan for the site, and it will be executed as part of the development. And so I'm a little concerned about the way the mitigation is set up. So my question is, what happens if there is no 106 review? And what happens, how does the commission partake if there is a 106 review, if there is interpretive planning? Is there a means for us to be part of that discussion, much like we were for PD Plaza?
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. That is a good question. I am actually not sure if there is no 106 hook that captures this project, and how you may or may not be involved. I confess I am not as familiar with the AUAR process in Minnesota. That's something I know. What?
Me neither.
Yeah. Hillary Dvorak is very familiar with it, and I think possibly Hillary Holmes, who is going to present on behalf of CPED as the applicant here in just a minute. You know, I don't know. I see your point and how it being somewhat loose. I'm having vague memories of, I feel like there was some discussion of wanting to leave it relatively loose in our discussions with SHPO, but don't quote me on that. I could also be thinking about another project, but because at this point, I think the redevelopment potential is still very much up in the air, given about, you know, and this meeting and what this commission decides plays a very real part into what happens with the redevelopment potential in terms of whether or not the commission decides to deny the demolition and move forward, because that ends up changing timelines, it changes process and so on and so forth. But I am not sure what might happen if 106 doesn't get triggered. So forgive me.
Well, maybe that's a question for the applicant. So as they're presenting, think about that a little bit. Thanks for trying to answer.
Sure.
Oh, Commissioner Bjornberg also has a question for staff.
Yeah, and I'm super glad Commissioner Howard asked a question that I was absolutely thinking about. But hearing that you have said that there was a phase 2 survey recommended for archaeology, but that hasn't necessarily moved forward. If there are resources found during phase 2 work, is that something that would come to this commission, or is that the mitigation plan that would happen as a result of that, or would we not really have a chance to review that or speak to it?
Thank you, Commissioner Bjornberg, for your question. That, in my opinion, that gets rolled into kind of what's decided here today. It's something this commission hasn't handled too much, the below grade resources. And this is an unusual site where we have resource layered upon resource, and that we have the foundations that were found were from, I think, late 1800s. And then we have a 1960s site that was built on top. It is something that has been addressed as part of the mitigation plan, as part of the AUAR. And I know, you know, it is something that is still a moving target, because the phase 2 for an archaeological survey really, you know, the shovel test pit identifies a positive, and in this case it was a foundations, and then the phase 2 would really look at, you know, what are we dealing with here? Is it eligible? And then if you get to the phase 3, it would be data recovery. I'm touching on some very old archaeological knowledge here. So if Jeremy Nino, who is the consultant, hears me and I'm wrong, I apologize. But I don't think it would come before you if the decision today is approval of the demolition. Now, I will make a note that, you know, staff added a condition on there. That is another option for this commission, is to, should you decide to approve the demolition, you have the opportunity to add a condition onto that. I will leave it at that. But it wouldn't necessarily come back before, if, let's say, something were found, should this discussion go in the way of approval. But I think my suggestion is there are ways to handle that in terms of adding conditions on to the recommendation, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Okay. I haven't seen anybody else pop up as having a question, and so I think maybe we can have some of these questions addressed by the applicant. So I would like to open the public hearing and invite the applicant to speak.
Hello. Good evening. My name is Hillary Holmes, and I am a senior project coordinator for the City of Minneapolis and CPED. Good evening, Chair Sundberg and commissioners. I'm here tonight representing the city as a co-applicant for the demolition of historic resource application for Upper Harbor Terminal for your consideration. The city is a joint applicant with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board on this application. The city will be transferring the future parkland on the Upper Harbor Terminal site to MPRV, which would contain the majority of the existing structures identified for removal at this time. There are 2 representatives from the MPRV project team joining me as part of this presentation. Julie Aldrich, MPRV project manager for the Upper Harbor Regional Park Project, and John Slack, landscape architect and associate principal with Perkins & Will, the lead consultant on the park design. I will note quickly that John had another public meeting tonight, so may not be on the presentation on the call at this point. And then we also have Salem Miller from the 106 group available on the call, as the 106 group helped prepare this application and is a consultant to the MPRB on this project. I will first give an overview of the Upper Harbor project, which you have some familiarity with from previous presentations by staff, and then our MPRB project team members will address in more detail the park design and reasons for demo of the existing structures being sought at this time, as well as associated mitigation. Can I have the next slide, please? The Upper Harbor Terminal site is approximately 50 acres of property owned by the city of Minneapolis along 1 mile of riverfront on the Mississippi River in the McKinley neighborhood in North Minneapolis. It's located roughly between 33rd Avenue North and 41st Avenue North, between the CP rail line and Interstate 94 to the west and the river to the east. Could I have the next slide, please? The redevelopment planning process began in 2015, as you know, when the federal government announced closure of the St. Anthony Lock to upriver navigation, which eliminated the barge shipping traffic that the terminal supported. The city and MPRB have been working in partnership on the redevelopment of the UHT since 2015, and were joined in the partnership in 2017 by a development team led by United Properties. This planning process resulted in the coordinated plan for redevelopment previously referenced, and that plan was approved by the City Council on October 14th, or I should say the city, on October 14th of this year. It also has resulted in the Regional Park Concept Plan, which was approved by the MPRB on December 2nd of this year. Next slide, please. This development overview is the result of multiple years of community and stakeholder engagement, and shows a site plan and land uses designed to support the reconnection of the north side to the river, as well as a development plan that will deliver on the following: environmental restoration and repair through any environmental remediation on site, a district stormwater system, and shoreline restoration, creating approximately 20 acres of new northside park space along with new connections and access to the river, adding new residential units affordable to current northside residents, adding living wage jobs, providing new opportunities for small businesses and entrepreneurs, and creating sustainable revenue streams that will be invested back into the Northside community. I wanted to just note at this time, in response to an earlier question around the status, redevelopment proposals or development rights. There was action in the city council last month in November, and that action approved a term sheet and development terms for one of the development parcels, also for the park parcel, and then awarded exclusive negotiating rights for parcel 3, which is the site of the outdoor music venue, and then the remainder of the private development parcels. And there is more information on that online as part of the council report, and I can answer more questions if there are any regarding that. Could I have the next slide, please? In order to support the transition of the Upper Harbor site from its original function as the barge shipping terminal to a mixed-use development, public realm and infrastructure improvements are needed to support the access and connectivity to the site and new utilities. That includes a system of bike trails, sidewalks, streets, new utilities to support drinking water, sanitary waste removal, and overhead transmission power line relocation. The city has worked closely with community stakeholders, residents, MPRB, Hennepin County, MnDOT, and the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization to develop design concepts that provide a connected system of sidewalks, trails, sidewalks, trails, and streets to support the greater connectivity and access between nearby neighborhoods and the Upper Harbor site. Can I have the next slide, please? I will now hand off the presentation to my partners at MPRB to discuss the park plan and design, the proposed removals and preservation, and also mitigation strategies, and will be available for questions after. Thank you.
Thank you, Hillary, and good evening, Commissioners. This project will preserve and interpret aspects of the industry. However, the overall interpretive message will emphasize the reclamation of this space by people and nature. There are 5 Northside storylines that were developed with local designers and artists. Histories of ecological harm and disconnection from this place, environmental justice work and vision, appropriation and reappropriation of this place, settlement history of the North Side, and food sovereignty in Black, Native, and POC communities. The project will include art, language, stories, restoration, creative infrastructure, and a focus on green infrastructure, education, and jobs to begin this process of change. Next slide, please. During community engagement, it has been clear that there are many ways to send messages about who a space is for and who is welcomed and celebrated. The project will balance industrial history and relevance with Indigenous and community culture and history. Community members have expressed a desire for an honest examination of what industry on the river has meant to this area and how the related development, infrastructure, trade, and pollution have impacted people and the land. The project will provide places for the language, history, culture, and environmental education and learning. Next slide, please. Community engagement assessed how key categories of park users, including children, teens, seniors, individual users, people in groups, and organizations might interact with the park. The resulting list of 10 key experiences includes information on how the physical park features can be tailored to support Northside community needs and desires. Desired activities and experiences for the park are organized into categories that inform the physical spaces. These activities range across wide spectrums and sometimes compete from individual to group activities to active and passive recreation. Next slide, please. The 19.5-acre park spans the entire length of the UHT property along the riverfront to the east and the development parcels to the west. Much of the park is linear with a 5-acre central park space. Linear park areas feature the Parkway Road with parking, which will also serve as a city street with separated bike and pedestrian trails, vegetative buffers, a gently sloped vegetated shoreline, and stormwater treatment areas. The main entrance to the parkway and park facilities will be via Dowling Avenue. Connections to the north and south beyond the park are planned to create continuous riverfront access and green space and can be completed with further land acquisition. Next slide, please. The 5-acre central park space is defined on the north, west, and south by Parkway Road and multi-use trails. The east edge is defined by the river and an existing structurally sound river wall to be retained. Some industrial infrastructure, such as the domes, will be removed. Red grain elevator, some overhead conveyors, and storage silos will be secured and temporarily repurposed. Public activity areas are focused in the northern portion of the park, while the southern area is devoted to gardens, green infrastructure, working and learning areas, and pathways to provide access to a more naturalized experience. Amenities are grouped to limit the site footprint and enhance user convenience. Core park elements include circulation pathways, flexible plaza space, flexible lawn and picnic area, a play area, ADA water access, temporary mobile buildings with restrooms and shelter, a green infrastructure training center, and gardens and natural areas. Next slide, please. Reasons for demolition include to advance the City Council approved coordinated plan for redevelopment and MPRB approved regional park concept plan. Redevelopment is needed due to closure of the lock and upper river navigation ending. And without economically feasible use or reuse of the structures, demolition of the structures noted is needed to prevent further deterioration and unsafe conditions on site, to advance the overall redevelopment of the site, and to realize the community benefits delivered through the public infrastructure, park, and development projects. Next slide, please. Reasons for removal of the existing structures include structures have no long-term economic value. Cost prohibitive to implement safety and security strategies with existing structures that are proposed for demo and removal due to numerous public health, safety, and welfare concerns. It is cost prohibitive to restore, condition, and design these structures for another use. There is no desired park programming that aligns with preservation and restoration of these structures. And desired park programming cannot be implemented because of current space restrictions with the location and size of the existing buildings. Next slide, please. A majority of the existing structures are located on future public parkland. In order to provide adequate space for public use and allow for views through the park and to the river, many of the existing structures may be partially or entirely removed. A small number of structures are located on a development parcel planned for a mixed-use building with affordable housing and commercial space focused on the local North Side community. Next slide, please. Specific retention, adaptive reuse, or interpretation of industrial structures is most likely to include showing the outlines of Dome 65 and 66 and possibly retaining some lower portions of the walls or to interpret the location of the walls. We may keep some remnants of Dome 64 outline in suitable locations. Reuse some of the smaller steel structural elements and concrete pieces on site for bollards, bike racks, public art, site furnishings, etc. In the short time, stabilization and reuse of the 4 green elevators for outdoor storage. We'll keep 1 or 2 green elevators to house a water reuse cistern for other storage. Maintain portions of the red grain elevator. At a minimum, maintain some of the steel posts and structures in place as a vertical presence on the site. Stabilize and repurpose some of the overhead conveyors. Repurposing will likely involve hanging shade structures, lights, security cameras, swings, hammocks, or other public amenities from them. Next slide, please. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to present this application, and we will take additional questions.
Thank you for your presentation, and I think there are probably a number of questions. I'm trying to remember who had a question who might transfer over. Commissioner Howard.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. It sounded to me as though you are intending to retain some of the structures like the grain structure, the grain elevators, and yet those are included in our requests for demolition. Am I understanding that correctly?
The 4 green elevators, the silo structures on site, are intended to be temporarily preserved. As we mentioned, a single grain elevator is currently planned to be utilized for a cistern for water reuse as part of a district stormwater management system. Long-term, the master plan for the site does indicate that those structures may be removed in the future, but at this point in time, they would be retained.
Okay, but they are included in the proposed demolition as application that's before us. The other question I had was a lot of the community engagement slides that you showed related to interpretive themes and things like that. I didn't see any mention of the historic nature of the structures themselves. Was that part of any of the conversations when talking with the community? Or was it just about the use of the site and connections to the river and the neighborhood?
Sure, thank you for that question. I can try to answer that and would ask our group to feel free to chime in. I am a newer team member on the project, and so I was not involved in the community engagement aspects of the project, but will speak to my knowledge therefore. I do believe that those conversations were had, and I believe it was mentioned during the presentation of the report that there is somewhat of a negative connotation with regards to kind of the history of the land use in this area. And so there were conversations during the community engagement process and it became clear that the historic nature of the land use as an industrial site and which included the structures associated with that land use were viewed as a negative by the Northside community and in a number of ways, and that it was not viewed by that particular community that those structures had a positive value to them.
I guess my question is, were they presented to the community as being a historic resource? Did someone say this site has significance for these reasons, rather than just how the community reacted? I'm curious if as part of the presentations, it was presented that this is a historic site.
I believe that that what was known at that time was presented and included in those conversations.
Okay, thanks.
Andrea, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to answer Commissioner Howard's question about demolition being sought for everything. Yes, it's being sought for everything.
Thanks, Andrea.
Are there any other questions for the applicant? It seemed like there was maybe commissioner questions about the archaeology moving forward, but I'm not exactly sure. Commissioner Bjornberg, did you have a additional question about the archaeology that you wanted addressed?
Yeah, I can pop in and ask. I guess my question will just be, can you update us on where you're at with the archaeology and if you are intending to take that phase 2 or talk a little bit about your mitigation plan for archaeology, because it sounds like you understand that there are going to be resources that you will potentially be running into.
This is Hillary Holmes. I could answer that if that's appropriate. Thanks for the question. Yes, the plan at this time is to take the report prepared by Nidal Cultural Consultants for the phase 2, and we're working to incorporate that into any site work that would be occurring next year in 2022. And then as well as later work would be occurring on development parcels. So that is being looked at for the schedule. And so that's definitely part of consideration at this time.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the applicant team? Commissioner Howard, I think you forgot your microphone was on. Thanks. It doesn't seem like there are any other questions for the applicant team. Oh, Hillary, did you have something else to?
Yes, I did want to add that this project has been, so thank you for yielding the mic again. This project has been many years in the making, and it also preceded my involvement as well. My predecessor, Ann Calvert, worked for the city of Minneapolis for decades and on this project for many years. And I wanted to note for Commissioner Howard's questions regarding how these potential resources were discussed out in the community, that I know that Anne certainly addressed that during engagement. So Anne was very involved in community engagement prior to my involvement with the project. So I can't speak more specifically to it, other than I understand that Anne had presented to the HPC in previous years and was always aware of the potential for the site, and so wanted to make sure it was known that that wasn't something that has been looked over, but has always been in consideration and part of the broader discussion. So thank you for being able to speak to that as well.
Thank you. Looking at the list of speakers, it seems like there's a couple other members of the applicant team potentially here, and I just want to make sure that nobody else from the applicant team wanted to speak before I move on to the public comments portion. Okay, don't see anyone waving about. Okay, so again, anyone wishing to speak for or against this application, we'll take the list of pre-registered speakers in order and then open the floor to any other speakers who may be in the queue. If you could please provide your name and address before making your comments, and press *6 on your phone. Wait to hear the pre-recorded message to activate your microphone so that we can hear you. So the only other people I have listed here on my list may be on the applicant team. I'm not sure. And so if you are, just let me know you don't want to say anything. That's fine. I have John Slack here on the list.
Sorry, this is Hillary Holmes again. I think that John did have to drop off for his other, he has 2 meetings tonight, so he had to go to the other one. Thank you.
Okay. And then I think the only other name I have here is, apologize if I get this pronunciation wrong, Sule Miller, who I think might also be part of the applicant team.
This is Julie Aldrich. Hi. I apologize, I was muted before. Yes, that's correct, part of the applicant team.
Okay. Well then that's all I have for my pre-registered speaker list. I'd like to again check to make sure that there is no one else in the queue wishing to speak for or against this application. If you could press *6 and let me know you're there. Okay, seeing none, I will close the public hearing and let's start the commissioner discussion. Thinking that a number of us have some concerns about this application, just based off of the questions and my own thoughts on the application. And I guess where I'm at is whether or not these can be addressed through conditions or whether there are stronger concerns than that. I'm wondering about additional mitigation potentially being in the conditions. Something maybe about the archaeology comes to mind. I was also toying with something about documentation, like requiring a laser scan of the site or some form of documentation, as well as the question of if it's for all the buildings, but do we want to require some to stay? Commissioner Bjornberg.
I will start this off so that Commissioner Howard does not have to start the conversation for once. So I would just echo a lot of what Commissioner Howard has had concerns about. I think that the mitigation plan feels like it is really loose, and that brings me a lot of anxiety about what that will sort of end up looking like, especially if there isn't something in there where that plan is being reviewed or worked through with the commission or sort of what other bodies it would have to work through there. I also sort of am having a lot of hesitation about sort of approving so much demolition for something that feels like a plan that is changing, especially if, hearing the presentation about the project and how, we might try to save part of this building or we might try to save this. I have a lot of hesitation about saying go ahead and demolish these things when there's actually talk of, well, maybe they can be preserved or retained in some way. So I guess I would like to see more of that or understand that a little bit better, and just sort of approving, demolition of something that this report has said is potentially a historic resource. And I mean, looking at these, they're super unique, and I understand the development potential of the area and sort of the plan, and there's a lot of great stuff as part of that, but I feel like there could be a both and. And again, sort of echoing something that Commissioner Howard had said about, the presentation that talked about the sort of 10 interpretive goals and, heritage preservation or talking about the history of that didn't even seem like that was really included, especially if, you heard from community engagement that, there is an association with the neighborhood and what had happened here. And so it sort of feels like, okay, well, we should just demolish these resources because it isn't valued by the neighborhood. But, I think that is also part of that story, right? Is understanding what had happened here and sort of this industrial area, what that does to a neighborhood. So, I also am just like, I don't know that I would know how to start to put conditions on this. So excited to hear what other people have to say.
Thank you, Commissioner Bjornberg. Commissioner Howard.
You guys probably have a sense of how I feel about some of my concerns about this. I do want to say that I'm really excited about the redevelopment of this property. I'm excited to have the potential new music venue. I'm excited to see connections between the neighborhood and the river, and the revitalization and the redevelopment is all really invigorating. That revitalization is exciting to me. I'm concerned that this application is premature based on the demolitions that are planned and where we are in the process. And in looking at our code, our ordinance, and in looking at what's before me, I'm concerned that the application for demolition of the entire site is premature. And so I'm having some struggles with that. I do think that if we were to approve it, I would like to see some additional involvement of the HPC in the mitigation measures, something specifically stated, and possibly some conditions that would allow it to be a little bit less loose on the could do this and might do that type of thing. But I'm interested to see what the other commission members have to say.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Andrea, did you want to clarify something?
I did, thank you. I wanted to respond to some of the comments that I've been hearing that as part of the AUAR, the mitigation plan must be abided by. It's not kind of a if this or that. They have to do what is adopted in this. And I think it is relatively loose in that I think, due to sort of the evolving nature of the site, I don't know if the team was ready to completely come up with a full-blown interpretive plan, but the fact that the mitigation plan does say, explore interpretive planning, they need to explore it. I see your point in that is not a do interpretive planning, but I feel like not only the applicants, but given just the microscope that's been on the site and the studies that have been done, a lot of people, a lot of the work that's gone into it has been the extra mile. And, with the city very much, I think, learning from what happened with PB Plaza and, you know, being cognizant of historic resources, but in this particular case where it's a complicated situation, you have CPED partially owning this, you have an eligible site. And I think, you know, some of the questions to think about in your discussion are kind of going through the findings, and in chapter 599 is, you know, do we have a significant resource? Has been enough information been put forth for you to make that decision, as well as does it have integrity? So there's some of the findings for demo, but then, you know, really going through, is there an unsafe condition that would warrant demolition? Has that burden of proof been met? Should you go in that direction? Or has the burden of proof relative to reasonable alternatives? Are there no reasonable alternatives given the documents? And I know there was a lot of them. There was hundreds and hundreds of pages sent to you. Has that been met? And if yes, then I think yes, you know, explore whether or not, you know, you want to add some additional conditions onto approving this demolition. I know it's a lot. It's an unusual situation, but I think keeping those ideas in mind as you evaluate this would be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrea. Commissioner Struthers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm concerned because I don't think we have that information. I mean, when I look at the report that was provided to us, I really can't see where specific resources are either they don't meet either of the requirements that are in the regulations. So at this point, I just feel like I'm probably going to have to vote no unless we come up with some more limited kind of motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Struthers. I'm hoping to have some other commissioners weigh in here. Commissioner Sandolt.
Yeah, I'd agree that it's a big package to kind of process all at once. And I appreciate the presentation that was given by staff tonight. It kind of helps set the stage to understand and to start to process the 600 pages that was in the report. Kind of getting that big picture kind of overview can help kind of narrow in and understand and process all of this information. I would say at the very least, I might want to continue this item. That's kind of like an option that I want us to think about. I would also say that there's been some talk about, well, maybe we could reuse these things, but maybe we need to demo some of them. But then the thing that we've been asked to consider tonight is a demolition of all of the structures. And I would vote against that. I would possibly support demolishing some of the structures, but not all of them. And in all reality, I believe that should be kind of up to the team that has been doing the design and the work and the planning thus far to determine which structures might offer the best interpretive and also offer the best opportunity for use going forward. And so I would like to see an application that is more strategic about what is going to be demolished and what is going to be saved. I also do empathize with the feelings from the community that this is not necessarily a thing that a development that they were a fan of and that it had a negative impact on their community. I can fully kind of empathize with the fact that not all histories are histories we enjoyed, and some histories are a painful situation. But I do also believe that, you know, we need to save or recognize very carefully those kinds of things, because saving that information and remembering the damage that we've done to ourselves is something that's important, and it's an important part of writing history is to include the negative effects. That being said, I think we have to be careful about then how we save that of the built environment. So I do think that there's kind of a different level, kind of a halfway between that we need to explore. I agree that, and I understand that the AUAR process has some mitigation in it, and I would say that in reality, it would be nice to have some input from our board, because if section 106 isn't triggered, then the AUAR, I guess, is the requirement for that mitigation, and that the mitigation then is required to be done, and that some involvement from the staff will happen to make sure that that mitigation is appropriate and adhered to. That being said, I think we as a committee might want to have somebody involved in that process. So I guess my kind of bottom line tonight is that I would like to potentially not approve, so deny this request, and recommend that a new request would come back in front of us that would be a little more targeted about what they want to demolish now. Obviously, that doesn't preclude a demolition permit from coming through, 3 years, 5 years from now, if they wanted, if at that point, all of the structures are looked at for demolition. So that would be kind of my thoughts on this for tonight, but interested to see, Andrea already, and I know Ethan has some comments as well. So interested to hear other commissioners' thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Sandbolt. Andrea, do you want to respond quick to Commissioner Sandbolt?
Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm addressing everything as we go through them so we don't get, so thank you, Commissioner Booty, for being patient for a moment. One thing to think about, so if this was denied, and this is just to make it completely clear, you would commence a designation study. That is pretty much the if-then situation. In this case, the applicant wanted to put the designation study before you, in as a precursor to the official action to try to be able to put as much information before you, which is really this commission's responsibility, is to make a decision on, yes, it is the demolition, but also then, but if you deny the demolition, you have to commence a designation study. And so essentially what would be happening is it would be probably a couple months, and then I would come right back before you with the same designation study and the same information, and whether or not you would want to move forward with the designation study. So that's kind of, the other option is, should you decide to, approve the demolition, and you can add conditions, that's, fully within your right. Think about some options that are, if you wanted some other types of mitigation, let's say, there's a slide in there that talks about, at least put forth by the applicant, that shows some green and gray ideas for maybe certain buildings to keep, and possibly that is a potential idea as well. Let's say there are certain buildings that you do want to. I'm kind of just brainstorming ideas as some potential options, but just to reiterate, to deny is to commence a designation study, and that's kind of the only option in this case for this type of application before you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Commissioner Booty.
Thank you, Chair Sundberg. I'm very torn about this. On one hand, the applicant's presentation was very, a lot of the values that they presented, I think, would be shared by this commission in terms of historic interpretation and some of the features of the overall park development. And I'm really excited to see, what comes out of this development, and I'm excited to see what can be programmed here. Demolishing resources is definitely a tough decision on our part, and I think I share a lot of the same concerns as the commissioners that have spoken before me, in terms of, it feels like a lot to approve a demolition of all the structures without really knowing a certain plan for it. So in terms of like a condition or something that I would potentially be in support of is, and I don't know what the options are. You know, maybe we have a lot of different options, but in terms of like a mitigation, you know, some sort of clear path for us to be involved in either the historic interpretation of the site going forward with whatever plan is approved, as well as any documentation of demolished buildings that might be, you know, part of that plan.
Thank you, Commissioner Booty. Commissioner Stady.
Well, yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of feelings about all these concrete structures and recent history. I wonder if we should vote on the demolition and see where we're at, if we got enough votes to do it, and we could add some language about mitigation. That's just kind of what I'm thinking.
Thank you, Commissioner Stady. Commissioner Johnson.
Yeah, I guess my question is, I'm not sure why, if we deny this, that it would automatically trigger a designation study. I mean, I would be in favor for just getting, having the applicant hone down their plan a little bit and just submit instead of like 30% plan, I would like to see maybe 65 or 95%, something a little further along. I'm just unclear why that if then exists the way it's being described to us as our option.
It's just because this is a demo of a historic resource. Although, Andrea, I'd like to get your thoughts on if we continued it, what the impact of that would be. Could the applicant come back with a more elaborate plan if we continued it?
So to answer Commissioner Johnson's question, it's in the ordinance. So to deny, then commence a designation study, and that's purely where that comes from. And that's largely how demo of historic resources are handled as dictated in ordinance in Chapter 599. I think it might be prudent to ask the applicant again, you know, what they are asking to, or what to state what they're asking for to demolish, because at this point, what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of hesitation because it's such a large demolition and because so much is being asked to. And I think it was really the applicant's intention to try to, you know, come forth and be as transparent as possible. And that this was their intention of, you know, for the years of planning that have gone into this. But I think with the hesitation that I'm hearing, let's see if you're okay asking them, you know, what is it you're stating to demolish? My understanding is, you know, it's sought for everything, even though this is still a bit of a moving target. But at this point in reality, it's those 17 buildings and structures that are needed for this first phase of this redevelopment proposal. With that, is that something, you know, we could turn to the applicant and have them restate for you to kind of help clarify some of the questions? And I don't intend to clarify the hesitation. Demolishing a historic resource is never an easy decision, but can we divert for a moment to let them state that?
Andrea, I think that would be a good idea. I'd also, if the applicant could clarify if the green and gray picture we see with the green buildings as potential preservation, does that mean those gray ones we're seeing are those 17 to be removed? Does that correlate with your list? Because the graphic has kind of helps visually.
Hi, everybody. This is Hillary Holmes again with CPED. Thanks for the opportunity to speak on it to clarify. The demo application that was submitted was indeed limited to the 17 structures that would be needed to make way for the Parkway project, as well as the park itself, and then also inclusive of those 4 structures on the future development parcel referred to as 6A. And those are not planned to be all demolished at this time, meaning the 4 structures on 6A, but some of them are in the envelope, we'll say, of the Parkway project, I'm sorry, the Dowling Avenue reconstruction project. So there would be improvements to Dowling on the north, improvements to 33rd Avenue on the south of the site, 33rd Avenue North, and then the construction of the new parkway through the site running north-south. And so some structures are in the alignment of the new parkway. some are in the envelope of the reconstruction of Dowling, and the majority are on the future park parcel site. And together those are the 17 that are included in the demo application. And then the preservation, as noted by the park board in that graphic, with the green items, and those are not included. I'm not certain if this, so that I just wanted to also note that as listed in the demo application, the structures requested for demolition are numbered 1 through 17. However, that does not correspond, necessarily to the other categorization of the structures, the number categorization of them in the existing structures report, and then also with their other, I'm sorry, I'm not going to have the right phrase, but the kind of historic categorization of them. And so I just wanted to make sure that was clear as well, and just to reconfirm, and if possible, to allow Julie to speak from the park board as well to this question. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, if Julie would like to add any comments, that would be helpful.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Hillary, for the opportunity to speak again. And yes, I would just like to echo Hillary's clarification that the graphic you're seeing with the gray and the items highlighted in green do indicate clearly the structures that are being proposed for demolition versus structures that are intended to be preserved. I would add that the design process to date has operated on the premise of this approach, and we are approaching 60% design documents at this point in our process. So we are ahead of kind of the conceptual design points in the process, and at this point in time, the work that's being done is being centered around these structures and these elements remaining on the site versus those that are being removed. And I think just to also direct everyone back to some of the design principles for the project for those structures that are structurally unsound or have, potential hazard issues or economic reuse issues. We do intend from a design perspective to be very thoughtful about encouraging interpretation of those structures. So one example I would present would be to share that we plan to have an area of the site used for green infrastructure, jobs, and training to really build capacity for community members and Northside residents to participate in programming and maintaining the site long term, and that we are working within the boundaries and the forms of the domes, for example, that would be coming out. And so we are really trying to be thoughtful about ways that we can incorporate those forms and that history in the site. But I would just also want to emphasize that a key component that came out of a very extensive community engagement process is that there is an opportunity as well as a strong need to really focus on healing and restoration here, both with the physical site and the larger community. And so I think we have to kind of try to balance both the history of the site with kind of bringing the site and the community forward into the future in a way that promotes healing and reinvigoration in this area of our city. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Commissioner Struthers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just go back to the question of why not have a continuance of this matter that would allow the staff to come back with more information about the 17 that are listed on page 9 and how they do or don't comply with the requirements of the city regulation. And I guess the second question, the one that's bothering me the most, is would the HPC approve this application from any other applicant other than the city because of the potential conflict we all have as a board that's appointed by the city?
Thank you, Commissioner Struthers. Andrea.
Thank you. My comment kind of coincides perfectly with Commissioner Struthers' comment, is that, should there be reservations about the large ask tonight, yes, it is appropriate to continue this item and to request the applicant to modify their ask and to come back. I mean, if there isn't enough here to make the commission comfortable with to sway one way or the other, I think it's reasonable to continue. That would be the appropriate response in this situation. To answer Commissioner Struthers' other comment about CPED asking CPED, it sometimes happens. It's an unusual situation, but as CPED is a land owning, not very much, but land owning agency, and in this case where we have a potential historic resource, there's going to be a situation where CPED does have to ask CPED. But I guess the other side to that is there isn't really another way around it. And that's where, we try to put measures in place to keep it as separate so that, certain staff members are objectively looking at it, that, and this as a citizen appointed body can make their own decision on it, regardless of the city, appointing to this commission, excuse me. But should this go in the way of a continuance that is appropriate instead of a denial, which would kick it to a designation study, which then we would be right back here with kind of the same information. So that's all I wanted to mention. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrea. I think that I am personally leaning in the direction of a continuance. And if that were to happen, I think it would be helpful to see in the new report, as I think Commissioner Struthers pointed out, a little bit more clarity on the specific issues identified with the 17 properties, as well as maybe a little bit more of a clear graphic showing that. After staring more in depth at the green and gray thing, I'm noticing that one of the green items, the truck dump hoist, is actually being proposed as one of the 17 removal items, but it's shown in green. So just a little clarity, I think, would be helpful, because I think I would be much more open to a demo of a select number to facilitate phase 1. With the understanding that then when the next phase came, we would be seeing it again, and it would give us an additional opportunity to speak and to weigh in on what's happening when more partners are on board and the development is further underway. So I guess I'm leaning to a continuance. Commissioner Stady.
That sounds like a prudent solution to me as well. I'm just wondering how much time staff would need, how many cycles we would want to do the continuance for.
I imagine at least 2. Andrea, do you have an answer?
Yeah, I'm actually looking at my calendar. So I'm just going to look at deadlines here. One moment. So the next meeting, if we continue to the January 4th meeting, the first meeting in 2022, reports are due next week, which I confess is probably not a whole lot of time to put something for the applicant to put something together, back to me, digest it, put together a report and get it out. That's where I usually like to continue 2 cycles. And if that is the case where the applicant has to put more information together for staff to analyze, that would push it back to January 18th, would be 2 cycles.
I'd like to make a motion to continue the consideration of the demolition of these historic resources to January 18th meeting of the HPC.
Howard seconds.
Thank you, and thank you. Is there any?
I hate to interrupt. This is Kimberly Holeen.
Yes.
And my camera's off, so sorry. We have not set your 2022 calendar yet. We know when our first meeting in January is going to be, but because you have not adopted your 2022 calendar, I think it would be more appropriate to just say that we're continuing it for 2 cycles and to not specify a date.
Thank you, Kimberly. Can we have a friendly amendment to that effect?
Yes.
And I'll second that.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so the motion is to continue for 2 cycles. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'd like to ask the clerk to call a roll on the motion.
Commissioner Bjornberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Booty.
Aye.
Commissioner Howard.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Nystrom.
Aye.
Commissioner Sandbolt.
Aye.
Commissioner Stady.
Aye.
Commissioner Struthers.
Aye.
Commissioner Vander Eyck.
Aye.
Chair Sundberg.
Aye.
That's 10 yeas and 0 nays.
Thank you. That motion passes, and we will continue this in 2 cycles. That concludes our public hearing items for tonight. Commissioners and staff, are there any announcements or new commission business to discuss? Andrea, do you have anything for us?
Yeah, I can. Sorry, let me grab my notes here. As Kimberly Sandbolt, sorry, forgive me, Commissioner Sandbolt has mentioned in previous meetings, the planning for the 2022 Preservation Awards has begun. I think the first kickoff meeting was today, this afternoon, and forgive me, I don't know. I know the other staff, Rob Skolecki is our representative staff person sitting on that, but would really encourage a commissioner to take Commissioner Sandbolt's place on this. It's like an hour once a month until leading up to the awards, which is in February or March. It would be helpful to have some participation, and I think meetings will be virtual right now, so you can sit in your home and participate that way. It's very helpful to have a commissioner participate in these meetings to help, show our, support for this, and also kind of help gain public attention for this program that we all have spent our time in. So there is that. I also wanted to mention that at this point in time, there will be public meetings will be held remotely until the middle of February at this point. That is what I'm hearing. And then also unfortunately, we're not able to what do I want to say? We need to recruit more commissioners to fill our vacancy that's going to be left by our departing commissioner in 2022. We did not get enough applicants, or I guess interviews, let's put it that way. So if anybody, I know last year we had a fairly robust recruiting effort. I was also not gone for 3 months at that point in time, but if you have any ideas of who to call or who to recruit, please ask them to reply or to apply. We've opened the posting again for commissioners for the next year, and I would appreciate your efforts in that respect. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm trying to make sure I haven't missed anything here. Yeah, I've been trying to recruit, and I would really love it to hear that our other commissioners have been trying to recruit as well. I guess I'll be honest here, I'm the commissioner stepping off after 5 years. So if it could be an architect, that would be, in my mind, excellent, so that we can keep the same ratio of architects. So I've been trying to pressure other architects. If you know any other architects, try to get them to apply. I think that would be great because we need a certain number of architects on. Otherwise, I think you'll still see me in January because we need to keep the number of commissioners here. So any other new business or announcements? Okay, I don't see any. With that, we have completed all items on the agenda for this meeting. I will ask members and staff if there are any other matters to come before this meeting. Oh, Andrea, yes.
I think I do have one more question, and forgive me, this is before we close the meeting relative to the previous item. But I know we closed the item, but on agenda item 7 for Upper Harbor Terminal, I think the applicant is wishing to know what specifically the commission wants them to come back with it being continued. I guess, what is your primary request in that matter?
I think we want to see an application that is just for the buildings needed for phase 1 demolition, giving us a narrower scope of items to look at and understand, and maybe some graphics to support specifically that. Commissioners, is there anything else? Maybe a little bit more robust on the mitigation intention as well.
This is Commissioner Howard. That would be helpful. I also, they mentioned that they're nearly at 60% plans. So there's actual plans for the site.
Yeah, so some more, a narrow, focused, but more extensive documentation of just, yeah, the first little bit. Andrea, is that enough?
I think so for the construction, then also what for mitigation?
I think a little bit more for the mitigation too, focusing in on, yeah, what would specifically happen for those 17 buildings.
All right, so I'm going to have, I can go back to them with what buildings specifically is being asked for in this initial phase of development. And then also what more details on the mitigation plan?
Yeah, I think what type of documentation, what type of interpretation, yeah, some deeper brainstorming to have gone into it.
Just on the mitigation plan itself?
I think so, yeah, for how that correlates with the demolition. And then, yeah, I think more information on this first phase. I think it was hard maybe for commissioners to wade through all 600 pages and come out with what the first phase was.
Okay, I will take those notes down back to the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Nobody's ever stopped me halfway through this end piece. Okay, so I will again ask members and staff if there are no other matters to come before this meeting. There being no other business this meeting, if not and without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. The next regular meeting of the HPC is January 4th, 2021. Thank you, and we'll see you in the new year.